Welcome back to the nationally syndicated Price of Business Show. Really been looking forward to this interview with Paul Fischer, the never-before-told story of the man who invented motion pictures. I was reading about this in the New York Times, saw a fascinating video about this, I believe on CuriosityStream. Is that correct? Or where did I may have seen a video about this that you were featured in it, Paul? Do you know off the top of your head?
Kevin?
Yeah.
There's a CuriosityNess podcast on YouTube. I think that might be it.
Yeah, I'm telling you, this is a fascinating story, one really poorly covered in history, but I think is full of significance. And so, and you know, I saw what you had to say both in the streaming and in the article in the New York Times, which everyone should read that. They should also read the book. Why don't you go ahead and kind of give us some context and background and set the stage for us?
Yeah, of course. So the book is about a guy called Louis Le Prince, who is French and who in the 1880s made the first movie ever made and then disappeared before he could make it public. And after he disappeared, Thomas Edison came along, the Lumiere brothers in France came along with their own versions of motion pictures, and became very, very rich and became very well known as the inventors of the movies. And Le Prince, because he had vanished, because of this kind of unsolved Victorian mystery thing, was completely forgotten. And one of the cool things about Le Prince is, like, the films he made exist, the cameras exist, the projectors still exist. They're in a museum in England. He was given patents. Those patents were approved years before anybody else. But he's forgotten, partly because he disappeared and no one ever figured out what happened, and partly because we have a way of writing the history of innovation that favors certain things, including commercialism and certain myths about male geniuses and patriotic motivations, all that stuff that he wasn't a great candidate for. And so the book kind of explores his life, explores how he got to the movies, and gives my best case at solving this mystery that's been unsolved for 140 years.
So is part of the narrative around him one kind of nefarious or sinister in his disappearance?
There is. One of the great cool things about this story, when you dig into it, is so Le Prince disappears in 1890, and then the law at the time had it that if you went missing and a body couldn't be found, all your property, including your intellectual property, would be frozen for 7 years. So your family couldn't do anything about it, your partners couldn't do anything about it for either 7 years or until your body was found, whatever happened the soonest. And a few months after Le Prince disappears, while his intellectual property, his patent rights to motion pictures are frozen, Thomas Edison comes out with his kinetoscope that comes out of the blue and sounds an awful lot like the thing Louis Le Prince had patented. And so Le Prince's family became convinced that Edison had something to do with his disappearance. And that's a theory that survives to this day, and that Le Prince's family, you know, ended up kind of trying to put forward in court against Edison himself.
Wow, that is fascinating, and you know, and he's one Edison who chose this in spite of his incredible success. You look at the world that Edison was born into, and the world that he left when he passed away. It was so dramatically different, and he was really behind a lot of those differences. But he often had a hard time choosing horses that would be commercial success. And he often hung on to things that proved not to be commercial successes over time. And so even his story fits in interestingly with this one.
He did, and this story catches him at kind of an interesting time, right? Because he had kind of a first wave of success in the 1870s and early 1880s. And when this happens in 1887, 89, Edison's kind of world famous. He's the most recognizable person in America, arguably. And he hasn't had a hit in a long time. And his first wife has died. He's remarried. He's moved to a different lab. He's trying to kind of recapture a magic that he seems to have lost. And there's even people in the papers making fun of him, kind of talking about him as someone who's borderline a con man, who keeps promising stuff that doesn't work. And so one of the reasons Edison gets into the movies at this point is he's really, really needing a win because he hasn't had one in a while, which is fascinating because we think of Edison as someone who could just come up with solutions for great problems and invent utilities just kind of in his sleep. And this story kind of catches him in a rut in the public eye, having his own motivations for really desperately needing to invent something